Well, that does it for us for tonight, but we're back tomorrow at noon and 4 Eastern on Sundays. If you can join us, that'd be great.
Hope you can. And right now, though, Mike Emanuel is up next with the Fox Report. Keep it right here on Fox News Channel. We know you have a choice. And Eric and I, we appreciate your watching us.
That's nice. And it's true.
We are getting a new look inside President Trump's legal strategy in the Russia investigation. A letter written by the president's attorneys to Robert Mueller pushing back on the special counsel's request for a one-on-one interview. I'm Mike Emanuel. This is the Fox Report. The letter dated January 29th shows the president's attorneys questioning whether Mueller truly needs to sit down with the president, especially in light of the vast number of documents handed over by the transition team and the White House. The letter also argues the president did not obstruct justice in the cases of Michael Flynn and James Comey. The president's attorneys write, quote, "It remains our position that the president's actions here, by virtue of his position as the chief law enforcement officer, could neither constitutionally nor legally constitute obstruction, because that would amount to him obstructing himself, and that he could, if he wished, terminate the inquiry or even exercise his power to pardon if he so desired." Ellison Barber has the latest from the White House. Ellison, good evening. What are the arguments against a sit-down?
Hi, Mike. Well, the legal team for President Trump has changed a little bit since January, but what you have here are two of his attorneys, Jay Sekulow and John Dowd, arguing and essentially pointing to case law and also documents and interviews to say that he shouldn't sit down with Robert Mueller. Sekulow and Dowd suggest that an in-person interview between Mr. Mueller and President Trump is not necessary because the special counsel, in their view, already has the answers to the questions that they plan on asking. The letter says, quote, "After reviewing the list of topics you presented, it is abundantly clear to the undersigned that all of the answers to your inquiries are contained in the exhibits and testimony that have already been voluntarily provided to you by the White House and witnesses." It goes on to say, quote, "In light of these voluntary offerings, your office clearly lacks the requisite need to personally interview the president. The information you seek is practically available from another source, and your office, in fact, has already been given that source." Sekulow and Dowd argue that case law supports them here and that if presidential privileges are going to be waived, quote, "The need for the exact content of a conversation involving high-level White House advisors must be undeniable, and the only source of that testimony are those persons participating in the conversations." Recently, one of the president's lawyers, Rudy Giuliani, said he would not agree to a sit-down without access to documents related to the FBI informant who had contact with members of the Trump campaign.
I'm not going to let my client testify, the President of the United States, even if he wants to, without those documents being produced. And myself and Jay Sekulow and Jane and Marty, we're going to go over it with a fine-tooth comb. If and when we find that this was handled appropriately, and there's some evidence on which they could base this phony investigation, will we have them testify? But if there is no evidence, which I assume there is no evidence, then, I mean, he shouldn't testify. The whole thing should be squashed. I mean, it should be ended immediately.
The January letter is very detailed, and it's roughly 20 pages long. Mike?
Ellison, to another hot topic. President Trump now says he will meet with Kim Jong-un of North Korea on June 12th. Should we expect more than one meeting?
At this point, it seems anything is possible. The president did say the June 12th summit would be the start of what he called a process, suggesting that there could be 2 or 3 meetings that follow afterwards. Take a listen to a little bit of what he said to reporters yesterday.
June 12th, we'll be in Singapore. It'll be a beginning. I don't say, and I've never said it happens in one meeting. You're talking about years of hostility, years of problems, years of really hatred between so many different nations.
President Trump met with North Korean Vice Chairman Kim Young-chol for more than an hour yesterday. The president says they talked about many things, including sanctions and denuclearization. Mike, the president said that he explained that removal of sanctions would only happen if they were willing to denuclearize. At this point, it's still incredibly unclear if that's something North Korea would ever agree to. The president did say that he hopes eventually he can remove sanctions that are on North Korea. Mike?
Ellison Barber leading us off from the North Lawn of the White House. Ellison, many thanks.
You bet.
One issue that won't be up for negotiation on June 12th is the number of American troops stationed in South Korea. That's according to Defense Secretary James Mattis, who says the deployment is strictly between the U.S. and Seoul. Garrett Tenney has more from Washington. Garrett?
Well, Mike, that's an important clarification that Secretary Mattis made today. There are currently 28,000 American troops stationed in South Korea, and in previous negotiations, the North has pushed for the U.S. to remove its forces from the Korean peninsula. Not even a month ago, President Trump appeared to be considering that idea as well when he ordered the Pentagon to come up with options for reducing U.S. forces in South Korea. Today, though, Secretary Mattis said those options would only be considered down the road after North Korea makes significant changes.
If we can reduce the threat, if we can restore confidence-building measures with something verifiable, then of course these kinds of issues can come up subsequently. That issue is not on the table here in Singapore on the 12th, nor should it be.
Secretary Mattis also had some tough words for China today in response to Beijing's military buildup on islands in the disputed South China Sea, and he promised there would be consequences. Further complicating the U.S.-China relationship are the ongoing negotiations over trade and the looming trade war, which has been put on hold. Those issues are important because China is going to play a big role in any deal with North Korea. On Friday, President Trump said the June 12th summit with Kim Jong-un is likely just the start of a much longer negotiation process, and China is expected to use its weight in those negotiations to affect policy elsewhere. Mike?
Garrett Tenney reporting from Washington. Garrett, thank you.
You got it.
For more on this, let's bring in Daniel Halper, contributing editor to the Free Beacon and the Weekly Standard. Daniel, great to see you.
Great to see you, Mike.
President Trump meets with a top figure in the North Korean regime for more than an hour, and now the Singapore summit's back on. Are you surprised?
Look, I don't think anything really surprises me at this point, but just because it's back on, I'd caution, doesn't mean that it's going to happen as it is now scheduled. There's a lot of time between now and June 12th. This thing went down. This thing, first of all, got sort of came up out of nowhere very, very quickly. It, of course, got canceled quickly. It came back quickly. So there's a lot of things that could happen between now and then. But obviously, I think just the meeting itself shows that both President Trump and the North Korean regime are very interested in this meeting at some point taking place, and perhaps both see benefit and both see perhaps an upside to having negotiations between the two countries.
President's at Camp David this weekend, expected to be preparing for that summit 10 days from now or sometime soon. Do you get a sense that basically it's all about trying to set parameters for that meeting whenever it happens?
I think so, and I think you try to game it out, try to see where he's going to go, how far you would go. Look, if you step back for a moment and you think about the Trump presidency, obviously there's been a lot of noise, and there will be a lot of noise, but this very issue, this summit, could very well define the Trump presidency in terms of international relations. I mean, you think of Nixon to China moments, you think of big presidential, Reagan tearing down the wall. This is the kind of moment that I think a president could seize and really define his presidency on. And I think that very thought is not at all lost on President Trump, who some of his own aides have suggested should be up for a Nobel Prize. This is a very, very big deal, and it's right of him to take it seriously.
Then there's Moscow getting into the mix. President Trump sounded off about that. Take a listen.
I didn't like the Russian meeting yesterday. I said, what's the purpose of that? But it could be a positive meeting. If it's a positive meeting, I love it. If it's a negative meeting, I'm not happy. And it could very well be a positive meeting.
Is the president wise to be concerned or even irritated?
Yeah, I think the conventional wisdom in Washington up until this point has been, look, you're either going to get denuclearization, which of course would mean that the whole meeting is a huge success, or we go back to the status quo and not much is lost. I think the Russia meeting suggests that there's a whole range of outcomes that are not that we can't necessarily conceive of at this point. Could be that North Korea, it comes out, it's no longer the hermit nation, but of course it sides with Russia. It could mean a variety of things that we're not able to conceive of at this moment. So I do think, yeah, he's right to be, hey, what is going on there, and wonder, is it good for the United States or not?
Well, in fact, Daniel, Kim Jong-un has complained about possibly the U.S. having too much power, and reports say he told Sergei Lavrov that he hopes to boost cooperation with Russia. How alarmed should U.S. officials be about that?
I think, you want to be alarmed in the sense that this could mean bad things going forward, but I don't think you want to panic. Panic means you go into the Singapore summit and you make a bad deal. President Trump doesn't want to do that. So I think you just take it easy, take it slow, see how things go. But don't get alarmed. Just be aware that this could have different outcomes. That seems to me the most reasonable approach. Take it easy. Nothing's going to happen in the next couple of days. Just take it slow.
Daniel Halper from the Weekly Standard and the Free Beacon, many thanks.
Thank you.
A U.S. delegation back in Beijing to talk trade as concerns of an all-out trade war escalate. The negotiations coming after the White House moved to revive the threat of tariffs on Chinese imports and slapped Canada, Mexico, and the European Union with steep metal tariffs. Rich Edson has more from the State Department.
Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross is in Beijing, trying to substantially change the trade relationship between the United States and China. The Commerce Secretary is reportedly scheduled to have dinner with China's lead negotiator, Vice Premier Liu He, tonight, and then another meeting with him tomorrow. The Trump administration says it wants China to dramatically reduce its $375 billion trade surplus with the U.S. The president wants to cut that gap $200 billion by 2020. The administration also wants China to allow American businesses greater access to its economy. Earlier this week, the White House said it is moving forward, implementing tariffs later this month on up to $50 billion in Chinese imports and restricting certain Chinese investments in the United States. China responded, saying it does not want a trade war, though it is prepared to fight one. The U.S. this week also imposed tariffs on steel and aluminum from Canada, Mexico, and the European Union. Beyond economic and trade differences, the U.S. and China are also at odds over China's military construction on a disputed area of the South China Sea. Speaking in Singapore, Defense Secretary James Mattis urged China to change its behavior.
There are consequences that will continue to come home to roost, so to speak, with China if they do not find a way to work more collaboratively with all of the nations who have interests.
Last week, the Pentagon rescinded an invitation to China to participate in a multilateral naval exercise. Mike?
Rich Edson reporting from the State Department. Thank you. Despite growing fears over trade, U.S. job numbers were strong for the month of May. The economy adding 223,000 jobs, pushing the unemployment rate down to 3.8%, an 18-year low. But some top Democrats are seemingly downplaying the progress. House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi saying this in a statement, quote, Democrats know that the American people deserve a better deal with better jobs, better wages, and a better future. We are committed to creating millions of new, good-paying jobs and raising wages, lowering the soaring cost of living for families, and giving every American the tools to succeed in the 21st century economy. Democrats will never stop fighting for the hard-working middle-class families who are the backbone of our nation. Right now, a day of celebration amid grief. Seniors at a Texas high school graduating with memories of a deadly mass shooting on their campus still fresh on their minds. How they honored the victims. Plus, a 4-day search coming to a tragic end after a missing man is confirmed dead. How his friends made a dramatic move to find him.
He was a good working man, and he wasn't a bad person. He just wanted something better for his family.
The body of a missing boater has been found in the Chicago River. Friends say Alberto Lopez fell off a boat on Memorial Day. They took a boat out yesterday after waiting for police to find him and spotted the body. Chicago police say they offer sympathies to the Lopez family, but defend their rescue efforts. A fire department diver also died during the search. Balancing grief and memories, seniors at Santa Fe High School receiving their diplomas just 2 weeks after a student killed 8 classmates and 2 teachers. This shooting is one of at least 7 with intent to harm others, at least the 4th fatal incident at a school in 2018. The call for tighter gun laws is growing across the country. Brian Yennis joins me here on set. And Brian, there were a few anti-gun rallies across the country today.
There were, Mike. You know, June is actually National Gun Violence Awareness Month, and this weekend activists organized at least 3 rallies in San Francisco, Chicago, and right here in New York City. Marchers wore orange in honor of those killed in gun violence in San Francisco. People marched across the Golden Gate Bridge. In Chicago, a peace tree was planted. People marched to stop gun violence there, which has already led to 189 homicides in that city already this year. And in New York City, hundreds marched from Brooklyn over the Brooklyn Bridge into downtown Manhattan to bring attention not just to school shootings, but everyday gun violence that plagues communities of color in cities across the country. A Parkland shooting survivor spoke passionately about her experience during the February 14th shooting, which killed 17 people.
Me too, yeah. No student should have to hide underneath their murdered classmate's body to survive, but I was that student. No student should have body matter picked out of their hair after surviving, but I was that student. No student should have to suffer from PTSD, but I am that student. No student should have to go to school fearing for their lives, but we all are those students.
And this is all about continuing momentum, keeping the debate about gun control front and center in people's minds right ahead of the midterms, Mike.
And then shifting gears to Santa Fe High School outside Houston, I can only imagine what the emotions were like at that graduation.
Right. I mean, just bittersweet to say the least. A little over 2 weeks ago, we had the 17-year-old student who walked into that high school, Santa Fe High School in Texas, opening fire, killing 2 substitute teachers and 8 other students while wounding 10 others. And yesterday, 328 seniors of Santa Fe High, they graduated with heavy hearts. There was a moment of silence for those lost, as well as a video montage honoring their lives. The 17-year-old shooter is now facing capital murder charges. Earlier this week, Texas Governor Greg Abbott recommended more law enforcement on school campuses and more mental screenings for students.
The result of the roundtables and the result of our discussions with the victims has led to this: the governor's school and firearm safety action plan. This document that we have created here in just the past few days is more than 40 pages, offering 40 specific recommendations.
And we shall see how that goes in the state of Texas. And President Trump, of course, visiting with the families of the victims of Santa Fe High School on Thursday for over an hour privately.
Brian Yanis, great to see you.
Of course, good to see you.
Thanks so much.
Yep.
An important escape route for families in Hawaii now being threatened by a new wave of boiling hot lava, plus strength overcoming adversity as disabled veterans compete in the Valor Games, how the competition has expanded over the years. Italian fighter jets painting the skies red, white, and green as the country celebrates 72 years since the founding of its republic. This is what it looked like in downtown Rome. It was the first official outing of Italy's new populist government following 3 months of political turmoil. Authorities issuing a new warning in Hawaii as a fresh eruption of lava inches closer to a pair of highways that families are using to evacuate. Jeff Paul is reporting from Puhoa, Hawaii. Jeff, good evening.
Well, Mike, we've just learned that lava is about 175 yards away from a very critical and major intersection here on the Big Island. If that were to happen, it would likely isolate anyone in the area who hasn't evacuated yet. Now, even though the flows of lava have slowed down, geologists say the volcano and its fissures are starting to expand in its path of destruction. In a 24-hour period, lava has reached 10 more homes, bringing the total to at least 87 houses destroyed. Those who have evacuated are returning today and bracing for the reality that they may have lost everything.
It's kind of scary, but it's thrilling at the same time, you know, but it's scary. She worries a lot about it, so.
Well, I've never been homeless, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, neither one of us have ever been homeless.
Now, the county has issued a mandatory evacuation order. What that means is if you're not supposed to be back in the lava zone, you could be fined or face arrest. If you own a home and haven't left, authorities say they're not going to rip anyone from their house, but those who stay could find themselves on their own with no one to rescue them.
If there's an incident where we got to go do search and rescue and it's too hazardous for fire rescue or any of our responders to go in there, we're not going to require them to go in there.
Now, the county estimates roughly 2,500 people have evacuated. Authorities are warning those folks who are staying by should worry about the air quality. The toxic levels of gas remain high, and those levels can change with the direction of the wind, really without any warning. Mike?
The images are simply breathtaking. Jeff Paul live on the Big Island. Thanks a lot, Jeff. Wounded warriors gathering to compete for top honors at this year's Valor Games. More than 100 injured veterans participating in sports, proving that nothing can hold them back. Rob Roth reports from California.
They served in the military. They're injured, many severely, but for the next 3 days, they're athletes.
I like to feel like I still can do stuff.
Renee Leone is one of about 100 disabled veterans competing in the Valor Games all weekend here on Coast Guard Island in Alameda. Leone was once a communications officer for the Navy, but she was mugged in San Diego while still on active duty, struck in the head, and woke up with a severe brain injury and difficulty walking.
I get a lot of suicidal thoughts, and it's hard to sit there and feel like you can't do nothing.
But she says she's found that sports and competition gets her out of her own head, at least for a while.
The sports have helped me, so I'm not thinking about any of my problems. I'm just out having fun.
The Valor Games began 7 years ago in Chicago and has since expanded. For many athletes, it's the first time they've been able to travel since they've been injured.
We've had athletes over the past 6 years who this is their first chance getting out of their house. So they haven't been out of their house until they've come to Valor Games Far West.
Elix also says the Valor Games helps these vets learn a new sport, which they can practice at home and become more active. This former airman suffered a stroke while he was in the Air Force.
When you sit alone, you are alone. But when you compete, you're with others who are going through a similar thing.
Sometimes those thoughts, they come back and stuff, but you just look forward to the next sport.
The Valor Games are on through Sunday.
The U.S. could become the world's largest producer of oil despite dropping prices over the past few years that forced job losses and some company closures. What helped surviving businesses overcome the financial challenges? Plus, there's been lots of speculation about a possible sit-down between Robert Mueller and President Trump. But a letter now revealing the president's legal team is against it. We'll break down their arguments next.
One of the greatest things about working at the Fox News Channel is whatever's in my heart, mind, and soul is going to come out. I have never, ever been told what to say, how to say it. I do debate. I get other people's opinions. Who do we cater to? Who are we trying to appeal to and reach? Forgotten men and women that deserve their shot at the American dream.
I'm Mike Emanuel, and this is the Fox Report. Back to our top story this hour. President Trump's lawyers sent a letter to special counsel Robert Mueller back in January outlining their arguments against the president sitting for an interview with Mueller and his team. The letter reading in part, quote, all the answers to your inquiries are contained in the exhibits and testimony that have already been voluntarily provided to you by the White House, and witnesses, all of which clearly show that there was no collusion with Russia and that no FBI investigation was or even could have been obstructed. Let's bring back Daniel Halper, contributing editor for the Free Beacon and Weekly Standard. Daniel, are you surprised by the arguments made in this lengthy letter by the president's legal team?
It's very fascinating and interesting, but not particularly surprising. Look, I think on the one hand, it does, I think, reveal that what we've kind of known, that President Trump and the White House is not too worried about the collusion charges. That they suggest is not, I mean, that of course is the basis of the Mueller investigation, but that doesn't seem to be the real sticking point. What their concern is about this obstruction charge, and what they're arguing about in this letter is that the president, by virtue of him being the chief executive, the chief of the executive branch of the government under which is the Justice Department, cannot obstruct an ongoing investigation, right? And I think that's really fascinating. And obviously, I don't know the answer to that. We all don't know the answer to that. But we can presume, should a subpoena be issued, that it will come to the Supreme Court and will be a major, major constitutional question.
Some Democrats behind you there on Capitol Hill are reacting, saying this letter suggests the president is arguing he's above the laws of this country and he could not have obstructed justice because he's the president. New Jersey Democrat Congressman Bill Pascrell writing, quote, Donald Trump is now explicitly arguing that he is above the laws of this nation. If today's report is accurate, Trump believes he could not have obstructed justice because he's the president. He contends that his pardon power gives him blanket discretion to kill criminal investigations at his whim. Your reaction to that?
Look, this is what lawyers do. Don't they argue that there's no basis for the charges and that they can't even bring the charges? I mean, the idea that a lawyer, I think we should separate that this is President Trump's lawyers and his legal team back in January who are making these arguments. They're interesting. It's not President Trump himself. It's a slightly different. I think that means something, for instance. And I think President Trump, by the way, they're arguing in the letter that we have been totally transparent, that there's been unprecedented access throughout the White House by the Mueller legal team, and that there's no need for a sit-down interview. Right. President Trump, we know, really wants to give an interview. Rudy Giuliani has suggested that he would try to stop it, but I think that's kind of tough talk by Rudy Giuliani. I think ultimately this is President Trump's decision. I think it's different than perhaps than what his lawyers are making or what the case they made back in January.
Daniel, I'm curious for your take on this. Why did this letter get leaked? Is the idea to put more public pressure on Robert Mueller's team?
Perhaps. I think it's also try to speed it up, try to signal what's going on. It doesn't appear to have leaked from Mueller's team. We don't really know what Mueller's team is actually doing. These leaks appear to be coming from the White House, and they do suggest what is going on, what is happening, at least one side of that. I would, caution that there's a lot that we don't know here. Sure. Although these letters and these kinds of leaks obviously do shed a certain amount of light.
And this was a January letter, so, who knows where they are at this stage. But in your analysis, does the president ultimately sit down with Robert Mueller, or is this a sign he's really unlikely to do so?
It's a sign that his lawyers don't want him to do, whether he does or not. And I think that's consistent. Rudy Giuliani has suggested it up until now. I think that remains consistent. Again, this is Donald Trump's decision whether or not to sit down. It's, by the way, his own legal risk. This is a very big legal risk that he might be taking, but it's something that he wants to do. And whether it's somebody can stop him or whether somebody should stop him, those are questions I can't answer, and I just don't know. I think it'd be slightly surprising if he did. Just because all this legal risk against him.
President Trump has not been shy about expressing his frustration, even anger with his own attorney general and some folks at the Justice Department. Do you get a sense the president is eager to see what the DOJ Inspector General has to say and whether it embarrasses some folks at DOJ and the FBI?
Yeah, I do. I think the White House is really pinning a lot of hopes on that and thinks that will uncover another aspect of this letter. And it was 20 pages, so forgive me for not getting to all of it, is that the whole collusion argument they suggest came from corruption at the Justice Department. So they're hoping, I think, that this IG report sheds some light on what that alleged corruption is and what happened. I'm not sure it really will touch Jeff Sessions. I don't know. I think it will go into Jim Comey and his actions. Of course, Comey's been a real big critic of President Trump and been on TV a lot with the release of his book last month.
Daniel Halper, many thanks for your analysis.
Thank you.
Mexico, Canada, and the European Union pledging to retaliate after President Trump hit three of America's biggest trading partners with steep tariffs on metal and aluminum. The EU calling it a dangerous game, while Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau making his feelings known earlier this week.
Let me be clear. These tariffs are totally unacceptable. For 150 years, Canada has been the United States' most steadfast ally.
Kitty Logan has more from London.
The new tariffs have sparked anger amongst US allies in Europe. Many are calling on the US to rethink the decision. The issue has overshadowed a meeting of G7 finance ministers in Canada. The 6 other countries attending the meeting alongside the US have voiced their, quote, concern and disappointment to US Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin. Mr. Mnuchin says he'll be passing those comments on to President Trump, but he insists the US is complying with international trade rules. On Thursday, the Trump administration imposed tariffs of 25% on steel imports and 10% on aluminium. The EU says these tariffs could be damaging to its industries. It's warning of possible retaliation with tariffs of its own on US goods.
It is pure protectionism. European steel and aluminium exports to the United States cannot be seen as a threat to their internal security. It is unfortunate because this is further weakening the transatlantic relations, and it also increases the risk of severe turbulences in the markets globally.
Meanwhile, US Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross is in Beijing on Saturday for talks with Chinese counterparts on trade. Those talks could be possibly further complicated by the war of words with traditional US allies over trade. And so President Trump is expected to address the issue of the new trade tariffs at a meeting of G7 leaders in Canada next week. He's already under pressure to reverse that decision. Mike?
Kitty Logan, thank you. The U.S. is poised to become the world's largest oil producer and achieve the decades-old dream of energy independence. Some industry analysts say many Trump administration policies will only make things better. Alicia Acuna has more.
With the price at the pump at a 7-year high, some may question the president when he says,
We're very strong on energy. We're essentially now energy independent.
Analysts say the president is correct. Good news is on the horizon.
I think it is fair to say that the overall policies on deregulation by this administration have been constructive.
For decades, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, or OPEC, controlled the price of oil, prompting shortages and long lines at the pump with an embargo back in 1973. A few years back, OPEC leader Saudi Arabia saturated the market, driving down the price per barrel. Some U.S. companies went bankrupt, but the industry adjusted, becoming leaner and improving fracking technology.
We lowered our break-even price much faster than OPEC could lower its, and so the bottom line was they blinked before we did.
Renewed sanctions on Iran and unrest in oil-producing countries like Venezuela are helping push up gas prices. But analysts say historically similar events would have shot the per-gallon cost up by dollars instead of cents.
Because the U.S. are major producers now, they're creating a buffer, not just for the U.S. economy, but for the global economy. We're still on a path to being the biggest oil producer in the world, the biggest oil exporter, and one of the biggest consumers.
Detractors say the president's pro-fossil fuel policies will hurt the environment.
Well, it seems like we're going back in time almost 100 years now to where oil and gas are king.
The Trump administration believes the Strategic Petroleum Reserve created after the 73 oil embargo is not as necessary now and is considering cutting the amount stored there for a rainy day by half. In Denver, Alicia Acuna, Fox News.
Meantime, Pope Francis meeting with oil company executives at the Vatican next week to discuss climate change. The Pope is likely to give them a nudge to clean up their act on global warming. The conference is a follow-up to a papal letter 3 years ago calling on people to save the planet from climate change. Pope Francis has made the issue a major concern of his papacy. After we're done, don't forget to tune in to Water's World tonight. Here's Jesse with a preview.
Tonight, we send Diamond and Silk to Harlem to ask about President Trump. And the 30-year-old kicked out of his parents' house is here. He just moved out. We'll tell you what's going on tonight.
Water's World airs next at 8 p.m. Eastern. A raging wildfire in northern New Mexico, scorching nearly 28,000 acres and forcing the evacuation of hundreds. How the battle to put out the flames is going. Plus, a new tribute to even more victims who died as a result of the 9/11 attacks. How many more will be honored? British actor Benedict Cumberbatch embodying a real-life superhero after reportedly saving a delivery man on a bicycle in London. The star, known for portraying Sherlock Holmes in the series Sherlock, was in an Uber with his wife when the star saw the delivery man being beaten by a group of muggers. Cumberbatch jumped into action, hauling the men off the cyclist, the biker's employer thanking the actor for his speedy rescue. The National September 11th Memorial and Museum soon to include a special tribute to those suffering or who have died from exposure to toxins after the terror attack, as well as those who helped in the rescue and recovery efforts. And the designs for the new dedication have now been unveiled. Rick Leventhal has more from here in New York City.
The 9/11 Memorial and Museum is one of the most powerful and popular attractions in New York City. A park-like setting on 8 acres in Lower Manhattan with twin reflecting pools in the footprint where the Twin Towers once stood. Soon, a section will be redesigned with a specific tribute to the tens of thousands of first responders who raced to the scene and spent 9 months searching for victims and clearing rubble, and the hundreds of thousands who may have been exposed to the toxic air, many of them suffering illness and death from 9/11 contaminants.
For these individuals and their families, 9/11 is not past history. It is a present challenge they confront every day.
The changes will come in the southwest corner of the plaza, called the Memorial Glade, next to the survivor tree, featuring a path where the ramp into the pit once stood, flanked by large stones the architect says will be worn but not beaten, symbolizing strength and determination through adversity. Comedian Jon Stewart played a significant role in making the redesign a reality.
We'll never be able to repay that debt, but the least we can do is provide them a place of comfort, solace, and community on the memorial with their brothers and sisters, with all those that they saved and helped, that they know is a testament to all they did for us and all they did for the city.
As many as 400,000 people were exposed to the toxic air at Ground Zero, and more than 87,000 have enrolled in the World Trade Center health program, with the CDC reporting nearly 44,000 have at least one 9/11 related ailment. John Field worked at the site for a demolition company until 8,000 pounds of steel fell on his foot. He's now a victim's advocate who's been to 179 funerals.
I can't celebrate this, though, because a year ago yesterday, my best friend died from 9/11 cancer, and sorry. I take this personal.
This dedicated space will remind all who come here how the best of our human nature responded to the worst, how human dignity triumphed over human depravity.
They haven't actually broken ground yet, and it's not clear when this redesign will be finished. It could be months or perhaps sometime next year. The folks here say they just want to make sure they get it right. In New York, Rick Leventhal, Fox News.
A massive wildfire torching thousands of acres and threatening a Boy Scout camp. Could the weather help stop this out-of-control blaze? That's up next.
State exposed.
America deserves answers. It's something you will only hear on this show.
Sarah Sanders and Mark Levin have must-see reaction Monday on Hannity.
A wildfire threatening a village in northern New Mexico, now doubling in size to more than 42 square miles as firefighters try to protect nearly 300 homes and a Boy Scout camp. Fox News meteorologist Adam Klotz joins us live. Adam?
Hey there, Mike. We've got some good news and some bad news with this situation happening in the desert Southwest. The elevated fire risk, the red flag warnings have now expired, which means the winds have calmed down. But as far as maybe getting this under control with any kind of precipitation, that just isn't going to happen. You still see light winds moving across the region, and rainfall, that could help out a little bit. Nowhere to be seen and nowhere in the immediate forecast. So it's going to continue to be dry, going to continue to be an issue for people out in the Southwest dealing with all of those extreme conditions. Temperatures back up into triple digits for a whole lot of those areas. 100 degrees in El Paso, 104 degrees in Phoenix. A lot of heat in that region, but really warm on the eastern side of the country, at least in areas as well. You're looking at temperatures getting up close to 90 degrees in Memphis. That's an area we're paying attention to for severe weather happening now and going to continue here in the next couple of hours. Really an area there across portions of Arkansas, stretching into Mississippi, and yes, Memphis as well. Kind of a bullseye where we could see winds up to 60 miles an hour with some severe thunderstorms, possibly hail, and yes, isolated tornadoes would also be possible with this system. It's dry in the west as we showed you, but this system moving right across the middle of the country is the one we need to pay attention to. Just really beginning to see this fire up here in the last little bit. It's not a large system, but every one of those little cells could produce some of those severe thunderstorms I was talking about and some of those winds up to 60 miles an hour. It does all take the daytime heating. So if you pay attention to the timestamp up in the corner, we've got several more hours where you could see some severe weather rolling through the Mississippi Valley. Once we get going here into early morning hours for tomorrow, so by 1 or 2 a.m., this should mostly have cleared off and will be clearing on the backside of this system. The other area to point out here across the country is going to be what's happening here along the East Coast. Folks in Virginia, folks running up into Maryland, the D.C. area, up towards Philadelphia, it has just rained nonstop here the last several days. More rain currently moving through that area throughout this evening into the overnight hours. So no surprise here, we've got flood watches and warnings, and even some of those little red areas, those are flash flood watches and warnings in place here, Mike, across that region. So just from one side of the country to the other, there's things to be paying attention to this evening.
My wife and kids in D.C. are saying, make it stop, Adam. Thanks a lot.
Yep.
A real estate sign has quite a journey. The sign from Diane Turton Realtors at the Jersey Shore getting torn away during Hurricane Sandy back in 2012. A man walking along a beach in southwest France spotted the faded sign and taking this picture. The sign is missing a large chunk, but you can still make out the name of the realtor and part of her phone number. Some surprising surveillance footage turning a bird into a viral sensation.